$800. That was the number Garrett Voss put on a $2 million Lamborghini in front of 400 people who thought they knew everything about cars. The laughter started before the auctioneer finished reading the bid. The CEO of Crane Prestige Auctions leaned into her microphone and let the whole room hear her smile. $800, she repeated. Folks, it appears we have someone who'd like the hood ornament. The laughter got louder. Diana Crane set her clipboard down and moved on to the next bid, because the man in the gray work jacket standing near the back of the warehouse didn't look like someone worth acknowledging twice. She didn't know his name. She didn't know where he'd come from. She didn't know that the calluses on his hands had been earned at a factory in Sant'Agata, Italy, where the most precise engines in the world were assembled by fewer than 300 people, and that Garrett Voss had been one of them. She didn't know what he was carrying in the breast pocket of that jacket. She didn't know why he'd driven across Phoenix to stand in a room full of people who clearly didn't see him, raise a numbered paddle, and say $800 into a silence that immediately filled with laughter. She didn't know that the car sitting on the raised platform behind him, the one with the caved bodywork and the seized door and the yellow sticker that read non-operational, had an engine that he had built himself with his own hands in another country a long time ago. She didn't know that when he looked at that broken Lamborghini under the auction lights, he saw something no one else in the room could see. She didn't know any of that, but she was about to find out. Stay with me until the end. Drop a wrench emoji in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. The auction house had been a freight warehouse once, something Garrett could tell from the exposed steel beams and the concrete floor that had been scrubbed but not quite cleaned of its industrial past. Someone had strung bistro lights across the ceiling and placed velvet ropes around the showcase vehicles. There was a cash bar near the entrance and waitstaff circulating with trays of something bubbly that cost more per glass than Garrett's lunch. He didn't belong here. He knew that the moment he stepped through the side entrance and felt the air conditioning hit him, cool and faintly scented with something like leather and money. His jacket was the one he wore to the yard on cold nights, gray canvas with the Transit Authority logo on the chest pocket, stenciled in faded yellow. His boots were steel-toed and clean, but they were work boots, and work boots didn't lie. He kept his head down and moved toward the back of the room. The charity auction was for the Phoenix Children's Medical Foundation. Crane Prestige Auctions had organized it as a headline event. 12 vehicles seized by the county, donated to the foundation, to be sold to the highest bidder. The evening's program promised champagne, a live string quartet, and cars that ranged from a recovered stolen Porsche to a confiscated Range Rover that still smelled like the previous owner's cigars. And, as the centerpiece, the Lamborghini. It sat on a raised platform at the far end of the warehouse, spotlit from 3 angles, looking like something that had survived a war badly. The bodywork on the passenger side was caved in. The rear diffuser was cracked. One scissor door stood permanently open because the hinge mechanism had seized. The interior showed water damage, the carpet was warped, the seats bleached and stiff. Someone had wrapped a yellow sticker around the steering wheel that read, non-operational, display/parts only. Garrett stood 6 feet away from it and looked at it for a long time. The other people in the room passed the platform with the appreciative looks of people admiring something that was out of their price range but worth seeing. They photographed it on their phones. They murmured to each other about the damage, about what it must have looked like before, about whether anyone would actually want it in this condition for display purposes. None of them stayed. Garrett stayed. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and touched the folded paper there. He'd been carrying it for 3 weeks, since the day he'd seen the auction listing online and pulled the vehicle identification number and run it through a registry he still had access to, a professional courtesy from a former colleague in Bologna who kept meticulous factory records. The number matched. He knew this car. Not personally, not by name, but by build date, by engine specification, by the configuration of its fuel delivery system, and the exact sequence of its ignition timing. He'd helped assemble 53 engines during his time at the factory. This one was number 41. He knew what that yellow sticker was worth. Nothing. You here to bid on something or just look? The voice came from his left. A man in his 60s with a thick gray mustache and a bolo tie, holding a glass of sparkling water and looking at Garrett with the particular interest of someone who recognized something he hadn't expected to see. Garrett glanced at him. Bid? On the Countach? A pause. Yeah, the older man's eyes narrowed slightly. He studied Garrett's jacket, the Transit Authority logo, the work boots, then his face. Something in his expression shifted, not dismissal, but attention. The careful attention of someone who dealt in things other people overlooked. What do you know about it? Enough. The man with the bolo tie extended his hand. Felix Ortega. I imported Lamborghinis for 22 years. Sold that model new off the truck in 1990. His grip was firm. I haven't seen one of those factory-build sheets in 30 years. Garrett looked down. The corner of the folded paper was visible above his jacket pocket. He tucked it back in. Garrett Voss, he said. Felix looked at him steadily. Something moved across his face. Recognition, slow and certain, the way it comes to people who are remembering something from a long time ago. Santa Gata. Around 2002? Garrett said nothing. Felix nodded once, like a question had been answered. All right, he said quietly. All right, then. He turned back to the Lamborghini on the platform. Good luck tonight. Across the room, Diana Crane was moving through the crowd with the ease of someone who'd made every person in it feel like they'd been admitted to something exclusive. She was 40-something, polished, with dark hair pulled back and a suit that fit the way expensive things did, like it had been made for her and no one else. She stopped near a man in a blazer and touched his arm and laughed at something, and the man stood straighter, pleased to have been noticed. She hadn't looked in Garrett's direction once. That was fine. The auction started at 8. Garrett Voss had learned engines the way other people learned languages, slowly at first, then all at once, and then so fluently that he stopped thinking about what he was doing and just did it. His father had been a mechanic in Flagstaff, a quiet man who believed that understanding how things worked was the closest a person could get to understanding the world. The garage behind their house was never locked. Garrett spent his childhood inside it. By 12, he could rebuild a carburetor. By 16, he could diagnose an engine fault by sound alone, a skill that had less to do with genius than with hours. Thousands of hours of listening. He'd gotten the scholarship through a vocational exchange program he'd barely qualified for, a technical partnership between a community college in Arizona and a training institute in Modena, Italy. He'd applied as a long shot. He'd been the only American accepted that year. Italy remade him. Not because of the country, though the country was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when you've never seen anything like them. What changed him was the factory. The Sant'Agata facility where Lamborghini built its cars was unlike anywhere Garrett had ever worked. The tolerances were impossibly fine. The standards were absolute. An engine that didn't meet specification wasn't adjusted, it was disassembled and started over. He spent 2 years there on the exchange, and then they offered him a position. He stayed for 9. 9 years of learning to build machines that were as close to perfect as human hands could make them. He worked his way from assembly to calibration to engine certification, the team responsible for testing each completed engine before it left the facility. He was one of 11 people in that role, the youngest by a decade. His time in Italy had remade him in ways he still didn't fully understand. The pace was different there. Not slower. The factory moved fast, relentlessly, but different in its relationship to time. A thing was not done when the clock said it was done. A thing was done when it was right. Garrett had grown up in American garages where the clock was always watching. Flat rates, book times, the pressure of getting a car through and on to the next. At Sant'Agata, The question was never how long something took. The question was only whether it was correct. He'd made mistakes in the first year. Not large ones. The standards were high enough that large mistakes were caught immediately and sent back. But small ones. Tolerances that were inside spec but not centered. A torque sequence that was technically right but rushed. He hadn't thought anyone noticed. His supervisor, a man named Carmine, who was in his 50s and moved through the engine assembly floor with the careful deliberateness of someone who had built more engines than he could count, had noticed. Carmine had not raised his voice. He'd taken Garrett to a finished engine on the testing stand and told him to listen. Garrett had listened. "What do you hear?" Carmine asked. Garrett had described what he heard. Technically, precisely, Carmine had shaken his head. "Listen again." They had stood there for 4 minutes. "Now?" And Garrett had heard something he hadn't heard the first time. A very faint irregularity in the fourth cylinder's firing. Not enough to fail the test, not enough to register on the instruments, but there, if you listened with your whole attention. "That engine," Carmine said, "will leave this factory tomorrow. Someone will drive it for 20 years. The sound you just heard will bother them on cold mornings, when the car is new, every time they start it. It will always be there." He looked at Garrett. "We will fix it." They fixed it. Garrett had understood something that day that he'd been slow to learn before, that precision wasn't a rule imposed from outside. It was a form of respect. For the person who would drive the car. For the car itself. For the work. He'd spent the next 8 years trying to be worthy of it. By the time Engine 41 came through his certification station, he was the fastest and most accurate certifier on the floor. He could hear issues that the instruments took longer to detect. He could feel them through his hands during the final assembly checks in ways that even his colleagues sometimes questioned until they looked more closely and found what he'd felt. Engine 41 had been unusual in one respect. It had been perfect on the first attempt. Every measurable parameter, every sound, every response. In 9 years, Garrett had certified 3 engines that were perfect on the first attempt. This was the third. He'd noted it on the build sheet, initialed the certification line, moved on. He hadn't thought about it again for years. Then his phone had rung at 6 in the morning, and his colleague in Bologna had said that number, that VIN, and asked if he remembered. And Garrett had sat in his kitchen in Phoenix in the quiet before Noah woke up and thought about a morning in Italy a long time ago, and an engine that had been exactly right. He might have stayed longer, but his wife got sick. Maya had been diagnosed while Garrett was in Italy, and he'd flown home on a Tuesday and never gone back. He'd told Carmine he needed a leave of absence. Carmine had looked at him and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "Go. Come back when you can." Garrett had known, even then, that he wouldn't be coming back. Some doors only opened in one direction. She fought for 2 years. During those 2 years, Garrett worked whatever jobs he could find in Phoenix. Dealerships, repair shops, fleet maintenance. Anything that kept him close to her and the boy who came into the world 3 months before she died. Noah, 7 years old now. Dark eyes and his mother's laugh, and a left ventricle that had been struggling since birth in a way that had gone undetected until last year, when he'd fainted at a school assembly and the ER doctor had looked at the echo and gone very still. The transplant list was long. The copays were not small. Garrett had been saving for 18 months. He worked the night shift at the city transit yard, 12 hours, 4 nights a week, maintaining a fleet of buses and maintenance vehicles that needed constant attention. He was the best mechanic there, and everyone knew it. But being the best mechanic at a transit yard in Phoenix was not a life that built financial reserves quickly. He'd seen the auction listing by accident, a sponsored post on a county government page, and he'd almost scrolled past it. Then the photo stopped him. A Lamborghini Countach LP 5000 QV, 1989, seized during asset forfeiture proceedings, declared mechanically destroyed, to be auctioned for parts and display. The photo showed the car on a concrete floor. The bodywork damage was visible. Someone had propped the scissor door open to show the interior. The yellow sticker on the steering wheel, non-operational, display parts only, was legible. He'd enlarged the photo. He'd found the VIN plate. He'd stared at it for a long time in the way you stared at something when your brain was telling you something you weren't sure you could trust. He pulled the number and ran it through a registry he still had access to, a professional courtesy from a former colleague in Bologna who maintained meticulous factory records and who picked up immediately when Garrett called. He'd called his former colleague in Bologna at 6 a.m. Phoenix time. The colleague had laughed. "That car is not destroyed," he'd said. "I certified that engine myself. It ran perfectly when it left us." Garrett had asked him to send the build sheet. It arrived 3 days later, a single page of technical specifications in Italian, stamped with the factory certification seal, listing the engine configuration, the fuel system tolerances, the ignition sequence, and the name of the certifying engineer. His name. Because Engine 41 had been one of the last ones he'd certified before flying home to be with Maya. He'd held that paper for a long time. It was a strange thing to hold a document that linked you to a decision made in another country in another life. He'd certified 53 engines. He'd signed his name 53 times on sheets like this one. He'd moved on from each of them without ceremony. That was the nature of the work. You finished one and started the next, because the line didn't stop. But this one had found him again. He wasn't a superstitious person. He didn't believe in signs. But he believed in competence, in preparation, in being the right person in the right place at the right moment. Because you'd spent years becoming someone who knew what to do when the moment came. This was the moment. Then he'd folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. Whatever had happened to this car in the years since, the crash damage, the water, the seized door, was cosmetic or mechanical in the ways that mechanics fixed. The engine was not destroyed. He was certain of that with the kind of certainty that came from having built it himself. If he could get that car for a price he could afford, he could fix it. Sell it to someone who understood what it was worth. Not $2 million. But enough. Enough for Noah's co-pays. Enough for the post-op care. Enough to stop lying awake doing math at 3 a.m. $800 was everything he had left in his savings account after last month's hospital bills. He'd bid it all. Now he stood at the back of the room and watched the auction begin, and he waited for the Lamborghini. He was patient. He'd learned patience in a factory where the only wrong answer was rushing. He'd carried that lesson across an ocean and a career change, and a wife who died, and a son who needed him. It was perhaps the most useful thing he'd ever learned. The auction moved through the first 8 vehicles with the efficiency of people who were enjoying themselves and the looseness of a third glass of champagne. A recovered Porsche went for $982,000. A confiscated Mercedes went for $60,000. The crowd was in the mood to spend. The foundation's staff, gathered near the side wall with anxious smiles, kept exchanging looks that meant the numbers were good. Garrett watched from his spot near the back support column. He had a paper bid paddle with the number 47 on it. He'd registered at the door, given his name, his phone number, a credit card that had $812 of available credit on it. The woman at the registration desk had looked at him the way people looked at someone who'd wandered into the wrong event, but she'd handed him the paddle. He thought about Noah. Noah, who had spent 3 days last month in the pediatric cardiac unit at Phoenix Children's Medical. Noah, who had asked Garrett, with the directness children had about things that scared them, "Dad, am I going to die?" And Garrett had sat on the edge of the hospital bed and taken his son's hand and told him no. Told him the doctors were going to fix it. Told him that everything was going to be okay, and had said all of it with the steadiness of a man who had learned to hold things together because there was no one else to hold them. He hadn't lied. He'd believed it when he said it. He just didn't know how to make it true yet. The transplant was possible. The doctors at Phoenix Children's were good. Dr. Reyes, the pediatric cardiologist, had sat across from Garrett with a tablet full of data and explained the pathway forward in language that was honest without being cruel. Noah was young. The prognosis with the right intervention was good. The wait list was long, but his case had been flagged as priority. How long? Garrett had asked. Could be months, could be less. We don't know. He'd sat with that. There was a particular quality to uncertainty when it involved your child. It wasn't like other uncertainties, the kind that made you anxious, the kind that kept you up at night planning. This was deeper. This was the kind that you had to live inside of, because there was no way around it, and the only thing you could control was what you did while you waited. Garrett had decided early on that what he could control was the money, and when it happens, the costs? Dr. Reyes had pulled up a different screen. The number was large. Insurance would cover most of it, but not the co-pays, not the post-surgical care, not the medication management over the following 2 years. The gap between what insurance covered and what Noah needed was a number that Garrett turned over in his mind constantly, the way you turned over a stone that was too heavy to lift but couldn't stop trying. His sister-in-law Rosa had offered to help. Rosa Medina was Maya's younger sister, a paralegal at a firm in Scottsdale, sharp and practical, and someone who had appointed herself Noah's unofficial second parent after Maya died. She'd offered twice. Garrett had said no twice. Not out of pride exactly, he was past pride, but because Rosa had her own kids, her own mortgage, her own life. He couldn't take from her. He had to find the money himself. He'd tried a medical fundraiser online. It had raised $4,000, mostly from people at the transit yard who chipped in 20 here, 50 there. People who didn't have much either, but gave what they could. He was grateful for it. It wasn't enough. He'd taken a second job on weekends, detailing cars at a lot in Tempe. Cash work, hard on his back. Another $30 or $40 an hour he put directly into the account labeled Noah Hospital. That account had a balance now. He checked it the way people checked things they were afraid of. Carefully. Not too often. Because too often meant facing the gap between what was there and what was needed. He didn't tell Noah about the account. Noah was 7 and had enough to carry already. But Garrett had the sense that his son understood more than he was told. Noah was the kind of kid who paid attention to the small things, the way his father checked the time, the way certain mail made Garrett's expression change, the particular silence that fell in the apartment when something difficult was being thought about. He was Maya's child in that way. Maya had always been able to read a room by the quality of its quiet. Garrett thought about her sometimes on the nights when Noah was asleep and the apartment was still, and the city outside had gone to its nighttime sounds. He thought about what she'd say about all of it. The fundraiser. The second job. The way the hospital bills arrived in brown envelopes and sat on the counter until he opened them. She would have had something practical to say. She'd always had something practical to say. That was one of the things he'd loved about her. The way she held hard things without going soft or going hard herself. Just holding them with clear eyes and looking for what could be done. What could be done now was this. And then the auction listing. And then the build sheet. And now here. He had $800 and a piece of paper and a skill that almost no one in this room knew about, and he was going to use all 3 of them. Rosa had tried to talk him out of it. She'd called 2 nights ago when he'd told her his plan. She'd been quiet for a long moment and then said, "Carefully, Garrett, what if you spend the $800 and you don't win?" "Then I don't win. That's the last of what you have." "I know. And if you do win, you can actually fix it? You're sure?" "I'm sure." Another silence. Rosa knew Garrett. She knew that when he said he was sure about something mechanical, he was sure. "Okay," she'd said finally. "Okay, but I'm coming with you." She was here somewhere in the crowd. She'd texted him from near the bar 20 minutes ago. He'd texted back, "I'm near the back column." She'd replied, "I see you. You look like you're about to defuse a bomb." He almost smiled at that. The string quartet had stopped playing. The auctioneer was building toward the centerpiece lot. The room's attention shifted. People turned toward the raised platform where the Lamborghini sat under its 3 spotlights, caved and damaged and still beautiful in the particular way that ruined beautiful things were beautiful. Diana Crane stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, and the room quieted for her easily, the way rooms quieted for people who were used to having them quiet. "We've saved the best for last." She smiled. Lot 12. A 1989 Lamborghini Countach LP 5000 QV, one of 1,172 ever produced. This particular vehicle was seized during asset forfeiture proceedings and transferred to the county. She paused for effect. Now, as stated in your auction materials, this vehicle is sold for display and parts only. The mechanical systems have been assessed and declared non-operational. What you're buying tonight is a piece of automotive history. She stepped back. The auctioneer began. The bidding opened at 20,000 and rose quickly. 50, 75, 100,000. There were serious bidders here. Collectors, Garrett could tell, people who wanted the car on a pedestal in their living room. The kind of people for whom buying a broken Lamborghini was a story they could tell at dinners. At 150, 2 bidders dropped out. At 225, 1 more. At 300,000, the remaining bidders paused. The auctioneer worked the room. Someone raised a paddle. 325. Someone countered. 350. It climbed slowly after that. 380. 400. The crowd murmured. At 450, the bidding stalled. The auctioneer waited, looked around the room. $450,000 for lot 12. Do I hear 475? Silence. 450 going once. Garrett raised paddle 47. $800, he said. The room turned. Diana Crane looked up from her clipboard. The auctioneer blinked. He'd been ready to close the lot. He looked at Garrett. He looked at the paddle. He looked at Diana. Diana picked up her microphone. $800, she repeated, and her voice carried across the warehouse with the particular clarity of a woman who knew how to use amplification. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have a late entry." She paused. "I believe someone would like to take home the hood ornament." The laughter came quickly and easily, the way laughter did when someone powerful made a joke, and the room understood it was expected to agree. Garrett stood with his paddle raised and did not lower it. Diana looked at him for the first time. Really looked at him. The gray jacket. The work boots. His face, which was steady. "Sir," she said, still into the microphone, still smiling, "the minimum increment is $1,000. "I'm bidding 800, Garrett said, "for the car." More laughter. "I'm afraid that's not how auctions work." Her tone was pleasant and dismissive, the tone of someone explaining something obvious to someone who should have known better than to walk in here. "It is when no one else is bidding," Garrett said. The room went quiet. The auctioneer looked at Diana. Diana looked at the room. No other paddles were up. She looked back at Garrett. Something moved across her face. Calculation, annoyance, the particular irritation of a person whose plan has encountered something unexpected. 450 going once, the auctioneer said, resetting. A long pause. 450 going twice. Nothing. Sold. To bidder 47. $800. The gavel came down. The laughter in the room after the gavel fell was different from the laughter before it. It had an edge now, something uncomfortable mixed in with the amusement. People turned to look at Garrett the way people looked at someone who had done something they didn't quite know how to categorize. He walked to the payment table with his paddle. The woman behind the table was trying not to look at him. She processed his credit card with careful efficiency. $800. The machine approved it in 4 seconds. She printed his receipt, attached it to a transfer of ownership document, slid both across the table. "You'll need to arrange transport," she said. "The vehicle must be removed from the premises within 72 hours. "I'll be back tomorrow," Garrett said. He folded the papers and put them in his jacket, next to the build sheet. Rosa appeared at his elbow. She was 42, compact and quick-eyed, wearing the look she wore when she was trying to decide if something was genius or catastrophe. "You actually got it," she said. "I got it." She looked at the Lamborghini on its platform, still lit from 3 angles, now technically his. "For $800. "The car is not broken," Garrett said. "I told you. You told me." She took a breath. Okay, what do you need?" "Rosa, I need to borrow your truck tomorrow. We need a flatbed." "I'll call my cousin. He has a tow company." She was already pulling out her phone. Then she stopped. "Garrett, she's looking at us." He didn't turn around. "Diana Crane." He said nothing. "She looks annoyed. She should be. She had a chance to sell that car for $450, and she used it to make a joke instead." He folded his receipt. "That's on her." He felt the eyes across the room before he saw them. When he finally glanced up, Diana Crane was indeed watching him. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was talking to a man Garrett hadn't noticed before, slim in a dark suit, with the particular bearing of someone who carried paperwork for a living. A lawyer. The evening broke up slowly. The foundation staff collected their tallies. The string quartet packed up. The crowd filtered out in ones and twos, some of them casting looks at Garrett as they passed, amused, curious, some a degree of respect that he hadn't expected. A few collectors who'd been outbid on other vehicles stopped near him. "What do you see in it?" one asked. A heavy man in his 60s with kind eyes and the confident ease of someone who'd spent decades buying things other people dismissed. "Engine's good," Garrett said. The man studied him. "You know engines?" "Some," the man nodded slowly. "Well, good luck to you." He moved on. Felix Ortega found Garrett near the exit. "You know what you just did," Felix said. "It wasn't a question. I bought a car." Felix looked at him steadily. His eyes were the eyes of someone who'd spent 50 years in the automotive world and had learned to read people the same way he read cars. "Crane Prestige has been in trouble," he said quietly. This auction was supposed to be their comeback piece. The Lamborghini was the headline. If it had sold for 400,000 or 500,000, which it should have, damaged or not, it would have been good publicity. A story. She needed that story. "She still has the story," Garrett said. Car sold. For $800. Felix lowered his voice. "That's not the story she wanted. That's the story that makes people ask questions. Why did $1 million car go for $800? What's wrong with it that the real collectors walked away?" He paused. "There's a reason the mechanical appraisal said destroyed." Garrett looked at him. "I don't know what it is," Felix said. "I'm just telling you, watch yourself. People like Diana Crane don't lose things by accident, and they don't accept losing them gracefully." Garrett thanked him and went out into the Phoenix night. His truck was parked 3 blocks away. The desert heat had broken, and the air was cool and clear, full of the particular silence that descended on the city past 10. He drove home through streets that were mostly empty at this hour. The city quiet in the way desert cities were quiet at night. Genuinely quiet, not just hushed, the silence of a place where the heat had relented and the world had exhaled. He checked the door locks. He didn't know why, there was no reason anyone should care about him yet, but he checked them anyway. Then he went to Noah's room. His son was asleep. The covers kicked halfway off the way he always kicked them. One arm flung out over the edge of the mattress. The nightlight painted a soft orange circle on the wall above the headboard. Garrett stood in the doorway for a moment. 7 years old. It was such a specific age to be facing what Noah was facing. Not old enough to understand everything, not young enough to be protected from it. Old enough to know that something was wrong. Old enough to ask the questions he asked, carefully, in the way he'd been asking them, not in desperation, but with the quiet attention of someone who was taking inventory of what he knew. Garrett went to bed and lay awake for 2 hours. He sat at the kitchen table with the transfer papers and the build sheet in front of him. The engine was intact. He was certain. The question was what else was true about this car. He started making calls the next morning. He looked up Pacific Valley Auto Assessment on his phone while he was still on the county line. Nothing. No website. No reviews on the business directories he checked. No license on the state contractor database. He called his contact at the county asset forfeiture office. The car had been seized as part of a fraud case involving an estate auction 3 years prior. The previous owner had died. The estate had been disputed, and during the legal proceedings, the Lamborghini had been included in a package of assets subject to forced sale. The mechanical assessment, the one that declared it non-operational, had been conducted by a company called Pacific Valley Auto Assessment. He'd never heard of them. He called Rosa. Can you look up a company called Pacific Valley Auto Assessment? Phoenix or surrounding area. 20 minutes later, she called back. It doesn't exist. What? No business license. No physical address. There's a registration with the county for a sole proprietor under that name. Filed 18 months ago. No other records. No website. No reviews. Nothing. A pause. Garrett. That's a ghost company. He sat with that for a long moment. The shop was quiet around him. The Lamborghini sat on the concrete, still dusty from transit, still carrying the particular silence of a machine that hadn't been started in years. He looked at it. A ghost company had conducted the mechanical assessment that declared the engine destroyed, which meant someone had needed the engine declared destroyed, which meant someone had known it wasn't. He drove to Rosa's office that afternoon. She had the research spread across her desk, the original estate case filings, the asset list, the appraisal documents. She went through them with him with the focused efficiency of someone who spent her days in legal documents. Okay, she said, pulling 3 documents into a row. Walk me through what you already know. He told her about the VIN check, the factory record, the build sheet. Rosa listened without interrupting. She had a quality he'd always admired in her, the ability to absorb information without reacting to it, processing it the way a good paralegal processed case files, looking for structure before meaning. When he finished, she turned the first document toward him. Look at this, she said. She pointed to a line on the estate appraisal. The Lamborghini had been valued at $2 million for estate purposes. Then, 18 months later, when it was transferred to the county's auction inventory, a supplemental assessment had been filed, the one from Pacific Valley Auto Assessment, dropping the value to parts only, declaring the engine non-operational. Between those 2 documents, the estate had filed an insurance claim. $1 million. On the engine. She claimed insurance on an engine that wasn't actually broken, Rosa said. And then she donated the car to the county auction to make the whole thing look like charity. Who's she? Rosa turned the estate documents to face him. The estate beneficiary on the original filing was listed as Crane Prestige Auctions, LLC. Garrett sat with that. Diana Crane hadn't just organized this auction. She had inherited the car, faked a mechanical assessment to file an insurance claim on the engine, then donated a car she'd already been paid insurance on to a charity auction that her own company was running, generating goodwill and positive press from an asset she'd already cashed out. And if no one ever fired the engine, no one would ever know. Rosa set down the papers and looked at him across the desk. Her expression was the one she had when she was calculating something. You know what this means if we can prove it, she said. Insurance fraud. At minimum. She picked up the Pacific Valley registration document. This person, the sole proprietor listed on this registration, I ran the name this morning. It's attached to a forwarding address in Scottsdale. No professional certifications, no licensed assessor's credentials, Nothing that would qualify this person to conduct a mechanical assessment of this type. She set it down. Diana Crane paid someone with no credentials to write a false report declaring a functional engine non-functional. Then she used that report to collect $1 million. Garrett thought about the auction house, the spotlights on the raised platform, the cheerful energy of a charity event, the champagne, the waitstaff. Diana Crane at the microphone, gracious and generous, donating a piece of automotive history to a good cause. A piece of history she'd already been paid for. "We need to call someone," Rosa said. "Not yet," Garrett said. "Garrett, not yet. Right now she doesn't know what we have. The moment we call someone, she knows." He picked up the build sheet. "I need to fix the car first. I need to prove what I know before anyone starts asking questions that she has lawyers to answer." Rosa looked at him for a long time. She knew him well enough to know what this was about, and it wasn't just strategy. It was the same thing that had made him bid the last $800 he had. The certainty of a man who knew what he knew and wasn't going to let anyone tell him otherwise. "How long do you need?" 3 days. Maybe 4. She nodded. "Okay. But Garrett," she picked up one of the estate documents. "You should know, she filed the insurance claim with National Heritage Underwriters. That's a big company. If they find out they paid $1 million for a fraudulent claim, they'll want her prosecuted." Yes, he thought about Noah. About the number Dr. Reyes had shown him on the screen. About 18 months of double shifts and weekend cash work and a fundraiser that had raised $4,000. He thought about $800 buying something worth far more than anyone in that room had understood. 3 days, he said. He was back at the auction warehouse by 8 the next morning with Rosa's cousin Miguel's flatbed truck, a come-along, and 4 heavy-duty tie-downs. The warehouse operations manager, a tired man named Paul, who seemed to have no feelings about any of this, watched Garrett load the Lamborghini without comment. As Garrett was finishing the tie-downs, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Mr. Voss, a man's voice, clipped, professional. "My name is Andrew Kessel. I'm legal counsel for Crane Prestige Auctions. We've been reviewing the documentation for Lot 12 from last night's auction, and we've identified a discrepancy in the transfer terms." Garrett climbed down from the flatbed. "What discrepancy?" "The vehicle was sold as display and parts only. Our auction terms, which are printed in the registration materials you signed, specify that vehicles in that category may not be removed from the premises without a separate transport permit from the County Asset Authority. A permit that I can confirm has not been filed." Garrett looked at Paul, who was reading something on his phone and not paying attention. "I have my transfer documents," Garrett said. "I'm sure you do. But without the transport permit, removing that vehicle constitutes a violation of auction terms and potentially unauthorized removal of county-transferred property. We'll need you to leave the car on premises until this can be resolved." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "How long will that take?" "We've submitted a request for clarification to the county. These things can take," a pause deliberate, "weeks, sometimes longer." Garrett understood. Weeks meant the car sat in a county warehouse while lawyers filed papers. Weeks meant the engine went cold again. Weeks meant his ability to demonstrate what he knew got harder. "I'll look into the permit requirement," he said. "You do that. And Mr. Voss, I'd recommend not attempting to move the vehicle until this is resolved. We'd hate for this to become a legal matter." The call ended. Miguel looked at him from the cab of the flatbed. "We loading or not?" Garrett stood in the warehouse, the Lamborghini secured on the bed behind him. $800,000 in insurance fraud in front of him. His son's hospital bills somewhere in the middle of all of it. Paul, the operations manager, had drifted back into his office. The warehouse was quiet. The other auction vehicles that hadn't been picked up yet sat in their velvet-roped positions, waiting for owners who had the proper permits and the proper paperwork and everything that was supposed to come with winning something at a charity event. Garrett had a receipt. He had a transfer document with the county seal. He had a legal right to this vehicle. He called Rosa. "She's trying to tie it up legally," he said. He heard Rosa's chair creak. Transport permit. Was there anything in the auction registration about that? Her lawyer says there was. Keyboard sounds. A pause. He heard her open something, scroll through it. "Garrett, I'm looking at the county asset auction regulations right now. Transport permits are required for vehicles classified as hazardous material, a car with a leaking fuel system, battery issues, that kind of thing. There's no general transport permit requirement for standard auction vehicles that have transferred ownership cleanly." Another pause. She made it up. "I know." "So, ignore it. If I ignore it, she gets a court order. She has the lawyers to do it in a day. And if there's any kind of legal hold on this car while it sits here, I have no access to it. I can't verify anything. I can't prove anything." Then we move faster than she does. Rosa's voice had the focused sharpness it got when she decided something. "Load the car, Garrett. I'll call the county asset authority right now and document in writing that no such permit requirement exists for this transaction. If she tries to get an injunction, she'll have to show a judge the regulation. She can't cite a regulation that doesn't exist." A brief pause. "The car is yours. You have the paper. Don't let her make you doubt that." Garrett looked at Paul's office. The door was half open. Inside, Paul was reading something on his phone, apparently indifferent to the entire situation. He looked at Miguel. "Load it," he said. Miguel climbed out of the cab. They worked the come-along and the tie-downs. The Lamborghini rolled onto the flatbed without drama. Garrett checked the straps twice, triple-checked the rear hook points. They were down the road before noon. He worked in his garage. It wasn't much, a 2-car space attached to the house he rented in the Ahwatukee neighborhood, a space he'd long since converted into a proper shop. Compressor, engine hoist, a workbench that ran the full length of one wall, covered with tools that were laid out in the particular order that told you whether a mechanic was serious or not. His tools were serious. Each one had its place. Each one was clean. Each one had been bought deliberately over years of knowing exactly what it was for. He'd had the Lamborghini off the flatbed and on the shop floor by 2 that afternoon. He stood back and looked at it. The body damage was real. The passenger side impact had crushed the quarter panel significantly, and the door hinge issue was mechanical. But body damage was irrelevant to what he needed to do. He needed to get inside the engine compartment. He needed to see what he already believed was true. He started with the exterior assessment. Systematic, he moved around the car slowly, touching nothing yet. Just looking. This was something Carmine had taught him. Don't go to the problem first. Walk around it. Let your eye catch what your hands will later confirm. The body damage told a story. A low-speed impact. Probably a parking lot or slow corner, the kind that looked worse than it was because of the geometry of the bodywork. The water intrusion to the interior told a different story. Storage in a space that wasn't fully weatherproof, probably a covered area that still let humidity in over years. The slow kind of damage, the kind that happened when no one was watching. He crouched near the passenger wheel well and checked the sill. No rust, dry climate. The car had spent most of its life in the desert and been exposed to moisture late, not rotted, just stained. He lay flat on the concrete and looked underneath. The transaxle was intact. The exhaust headers were dusty, and there was some surface oxidation on the heat shields, but the metal underneath was sound. No evidence of a catastrophic mechanical event. No cracked casings. No obvious external damage to the engine bay. The chassis rails were straight. He stood. Circled to the back. The engine lid release had seized. He worked it for 20 minutes with penetrating oil and careful, patient force. Not too much. Never too much on something that's seized. Because if you snapped the mechanism, you'd have to open the lid another way entirely, and he didn't have time for that. until it gave. The engine compartment opened. He stood there looking at it. The V12 was there, all 12 cylinders. The fuel injection rails were intact. The ignition harness was intact. There was dust on everything, and a colony of some desert insect had built something fibrous in the corner near the coolant reservoir, and the air filter housing had a crack in it that was cosmetic. Nothing was broken. He let out a breath he'd been carrying since the auction house. He went to work. If you're still with me, drop a wrench in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who's here for this. He worked through the afternoon and into the evening, stopping twice, once to call Rosa, once to make Noah dinner. Noah sat at the kitchen table eating spaghetti and watching him with the particular alertness children had about things they sensed mattered. "What are you doing in the garage?" Noah asked. "Fixing a car." "What kind of car?" "Old kind." "Fancy kind." Noah twirled spaghetti. "Is it for the hospital?" Garrett looked at his son. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you work on the cars at your job," Noah said, with the simple logic of 7. "And when you do extra car things at home, it's usually for something." He wasn't wrong. "Yeah," Garrett said. "It's for the hospital." Noah thought about this. He had the dark eyes and the easy stillness of his mother, the quality of sitting quietly with things instead of running from them. "Okay," he said. "I hope you fix it good. I intend to." After Noah was in bed, Garrett called Felix Ortega. Felix answered on the second ring, unsurprised. "I wondered if you'd call," he said. Garrett told him what he'd found with the estate documents, the ghost assessment company, the insurance claim, the timeline. Felix was quiet for a moment. The quiet wasn't uncertainty. Garrett had learned the difference, working alongside careful people. It was the quiet of someone organizing information. "That's significant," Felix said. She insured an engine she knew was functional, then donated the car to make herself look generous. A pause. And put her own auction house in charge of the event. Yes, the charity auction would generate news coverage, photographs, testimonials from the foundation. Felix's voice was measured. If anyone had ever come asking about the insurance claim, she'd have been the generous businesswoman who donated a $100,000 car to sick children, not someone who collected fraudulent insurance money. Until now. "Until you," Felix said, "because you knew the car. I need your help. You have it. No hesitation. What do you need? You imported these cars. You know the documentation chain. If I need someone who can speak to the authenticity of the factory build sheet, explain what it means that the engine is certified running and that my name is on the certification, would you do that? Formally, if it comes to that?" "Yes," Felix said. "And if I can get the engine running, can you bring someone who can verify it? Someone the insurance company would accept as a qualified independent assessor?" A pause. "I know a man. Retired from the National Insurance Assessment Board. He's 74 and cranky and honest in the way people get when they stop caring about being liked." Felix's voice carried something like warmth. "He'll come." Rosa was at his garage the next morning with a box of files and her own laptop. She'd spent the night going through the insurance claim documentation and had found 2 things. The first was that National Heritage underwriters had paid the claim in full, $1 million, 18 months ago. The second was that the claim had been processed based on the Pacific Valley Auto Assessment Report alone. No independent verification, no second opinion. Standard procedure for claims under a certain threshold, which the $1 million engine claim had narrowly fallen under. She structured it to avoid the secondary review, Rosa said. If the claim had been $1 over the threshold, they'd have sent their own assessor. "Careful," Garrett said. "Very careful." Rosa set down a stapled document. "I talked to the National Heritage Fraud Investigation line this morning. Anonymously described a hypothetical scenario. Asked what they'd want to see if someone brought them evidence of a falsified mechanical assessment." She looked up. "They want the original build sheet, They want an independent running demonstration of the engine, and they want the Pacific Valley registration documents. We have all three, Garrett said. Almost. She put her hand on his arm. The car has to run, Garrett. Without that, everything else is circumstantial. He went back to work. It took 2 more days. The fuel system needed bleeding. The injectors needed cleaning. The fuel had degraded in them, sitting dormant in the lines and turning to a sticky residue that blocked flow with the particular thoroughness of something that had had years to settle. He removed each injector individually, cleaned them in a solvent bath, tested the spray pattern. 2 were borderline. He ordered replacements from the specialty supplier Felix had connected him with, a man in Tempe who dealt in European performance parts and had been in the business since before Garrett was born. The air filter housing needed replacing. The coolant system needed a complete flush. The coolant had broken down, and there was mineral buildup in the reservoir that he flushed 3 times until the water ran clear. The battery was dead, which was expected. He sourced a replacement rated to the correct specification. He worked methodically. He didn't take shortcuts. He'd spent too many years in a place where shortcuts were unacceptable to start now. There was a moment, near the end of the second day, when he was kneeling beside the car, checking the fuel line connections for the 3rd time, and his back was aching, and his knees had gone numb from the concrete. And he thought, this is what you spent 9 years in Italy learning. Not the factory, not the prestige, not the certificate with the Italian stamp. This, kneeling on a garage floor in Arizona at 11 at night with aching hands, knowing what to do. He kept going. He didn't rush. Rushing was how you miss things, and he couldn't afford to miss anything. On the morning of the 4th day, he stood in front of the Lamborghini, fuel lines clear, injectors clean, battery fresh, oil-topped, coolant circulating. He'd left the engine lid open so he could hear everything. Noah appeared in the doorway from the house. He was in his pajamas, the ones with the planets on them, and he was carrying a glass of juice. He looked at the car. Is it ready? He asked. I think so, Garrett said. Noah considered the Lamborghini with the gravity of a 7-year-old weighing something important. It's yellow, he said. It's yellow. I like it. Garrett looked at his son in the garage doorway. The morning light was coming in sideways, early desert light, the kind that was soft before the heat got into it. Noah looked small against the frame. Go back inside and eat breakfast, Garrett said. I'll come get you. Noah retreated. Garrett turned back to the car. He sat in the driver's seat. The interior smelled like dust and old leather, and something faint beneath that, the particular combination of materials that aged Italian cars had, unmistakable to anyone who'd spent time around them. He'd smelled it hundreds of times at the factory, coming off finished cars before they were crated for delivery. It was a smell that meant craftsmanship. Time. The accumulation of human attention. He put the key in. He turned it. The V12 caught on the 3rd attempt. Rough at first, stumbling, the fuel system re-establishing flow through injectors that had been dormant for years. Then it smoothed. Then it rose to the particular sound that the LP 5000 QV engine made when it was right. A sound Garrett had heard 53 times in a factory in Italy and had never forgotten. He sat in the car with the engine running and listened. Through the window of his garage, in the early Phoenix morning, he could see the small square of light that was Noah's bedroom. He sat there for a long time. Then he took out his phone and called Rosa. It runs, he said. A long pause. Okay, she said. Her voice was different. Quiet. Okay, what do we do now? We make one call, Garrett said. To Diana Crane. He didn't call Diana. He called her lawyer. He called Andrew Kessel at 9 in the morning and asked for a meeting. Kessel was professional and neutral in the way lawyers were when they didn't know what the other side had. He said he'd have to check with his client. He called back in 40 minutes and said Diana Crane would meet Garrett at the Crane Prestige offices the following morning, 10 10 o'clock. Garrett said that was fine. He'd learned this about confrontation. The people who came in loud were usually the people who were least sure of what they had. The people who were certain came in quiet. He spent the rest of the day preparing. Rosa had organized the documentation into a clear sequence. The original estate appraisal valuing the Lamborghini at $2 million. The Pacific Valley Auto Assessment report declaring the engine non-operational. Filed 18 months later. The insurance claim to National Heritage underwriters for $1 million, paid in full. The Pacific Valley business registration, filed 30 days before the assessment. No physical address, no employees, sole proprietor listed as a name that Rosa had traced to a forwarding address in Scottsdale. Then, the factory build sheet. Engine 41. Certification date. Certifying engineer's signature. Then, Garrett's own credentials, his employment records from Santa Gata, his certification records, his employee ID that he'd kept all these years in the same way mechanics kept things. Because you never knew. Then Felix Ortega's letter, signed and notarized, attesting to the authenticity of the build documentation and confirming his professional assessment of the vehicle. And at the end of the file, a single page, a video file link. The engine running. Felix's retired friend from the National Insurance Assessment Board, whose name was Harold Park, had come to Garrett's garage the previous afternoon. He was indeed 74 and cranky, and moved with the careful deliberateness of someone who'd stopped performing anything for anyone a long time ago. He'd walked around the car once. He'd looked at the build sheet. He'd watched Garrett start the engine. He'd stood there for a full minute, just listening to the V12. Then, he'd said, "That engine is in excellent condition." He'd written it down on his own letterhead and signed it. Rosa had a copy. The Crane Prestige offices were in a glass building in North Scottsdale, the kind of building that said money through architecture. The lobby had original artwork and furniture that was uncomfortable in the specific way that expensive lobbies were uncomfortable, designed to be looked at rather than used. Garrett arrived at 5 to 10 in his work jacket. He didn't own anything else. The receptionist took him to a conference room on the 4th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A city view. A table long enough that you could seat a small board of directors. When Diana Crane came in 5 minutes later, she brought Andrew Kessel and one other person Garrett didn't recognize. A woman with a tablet who sat at the far end of the table and began typing before anyone spoke. "Mr. Voss," Diana said. She sat down. Her manner was controlled and pleasant in the way that a person was controlled and pleasant when they were also ready for a fight. "Thank you for coming in." "Thank you for meeting with me," Garrett said. "Andrew tells me you wanted to discuss Lot 12. "I did." He set the folder on the table, didn't open it. "I wanted to give you a chance to resolve this before I contact National Heritage underwriters." Diana's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the room, the way air shifted before a storm. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said. "I think you know what I mean," Garrett said. "But I'll walk through it if that's helpful." Kessel leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Voss, I'll remind you that if you're making any kind of accusatory—" "I'm not making anything yet," Garrett said. He kept his voice level. "I'm describing what I found and giving you an opportunity to respond." He opened the folder. He took them through it in order. The estate appraisal. The supplemental assessment. The insurance claim. The Pacific Valley registration. He set each document on the table and left it there as he moved to the next, so that by the time he was done, the table between them was covered. Diana Crane looked at the documents. She didn't touch them. Kessel was making notes. The woman with the tablet had stopped typing. "The assessment company doesn't exist," Garrett said. Pacific Valley Auto Assessment filed its registration 30 days before it produced the only report it ever produced. There's no license, no physical address, no professional credentials associated with the sole proprietor. That report declared the engine of this vehicle non-operational. Based on that report, $1 million insurance claim was paid. He paused. The engine is not non-operational. Silence. The factory build sheet for engine 41 is in that folder, Garrett continued. It was certified as fully operational when it left Santagata. I know that because my signature is on it. I was the certifying engineer. He reached across and turned the build sheet to face Diana. I spent 9 years at that factory. This is my handwriting. Diana Crane looked at the signature. She looked at Garrett. For the first time since he'd walked into the auction house in his gray jacket, he saw something in someone's face shift. Not the calculation of a person managing a crisis. Something underneath that. Andrew, Diana said quietly. Kessel looked up from his notes. I need a moment. Her voice was different. The pleasantness had dropped out of it. What was left was something more human. The sound of a person standing at the edge of something they hadn't wanted to reach. Can you give us a moment? Kessel frowned. Diana, I don't recommend Andrew. Please, he stood. The woman with the tablet stood. They went out. The door closed. The room was quiet. Diana Crane sat across from Garrett. She looked at the documents on the table. She didn't look at him. I needed the money, she said. It wasn't a justification. It wasn't even quite an explanation. It was just a statement, delivered flatly, like something she was putting down after carrying it too long. Garrett said nothing. The company's been in trouble. She continued. The estate deal, the one the car came from, it went sideways. We were supposed to receive a commission on the full estate sale. The estate went into litigation. The commission got tied up. We had payroll, we had lease payments, we had events in the pipeline that needed deposits. She was still looking at the documents. The car was sitting in my inventory as a transferred asset. The engine assessment seemed... She stopped. It seemed like a way to stabilize things. $1 million, Garrett said. Yes, on a fraudulent claim. She closed her eyes. Yes, and then you donated the car to the charity auction your company was running. I needed the goodwill. I needed the publicity. I needed... She pressed her fingers together. I needed it to look like I was doing something generous. Garrett looked at the table between them, at the documents that told the truth, laid out in order. He didn't feel what he'd expected to feel. He'd come here ready for a fight. He'd spent days building the case, organizing the documents, running the engine, calling Harold Park, making sure every piece was in place. He'd walked into this building with the confidence of someone who had what he had and knew what it meant. But sitting across from Diana Crane now, watching her look at evidence of something she'd done, something she'd known was wrong when she did it, he felt something more complicated than satisfaction. She looked like someone who'd been running for a long time and had finally stopped. He thought about the auction house. The way she'd leaned into the microphone, the laughter she'd collected so easily, turning his bid into a punchline without even knowing who he was or what he carried in his jacket pocket. He'd stood there and held the paddle and said nothing, and the room had laughed, and none of them had known. They knew now. Well, she knew. The room didn't exist anymore. There was just this office, this table, this woman in her dark suit who had built something and was watching it fail under the weight of what she'd done to save it. What do you want? Diana asked. She looked at him then, directly. Her face looked different than it had in the auction house, different than it had when she'd made the joke into the microphone. It looked tired. Tell me what you want from this. I don't want anything from you, Garrett said. She blinked. I have a son, he said. He needs a heart transplant. I've been trying to save money for 18 months. I saw this car and I knew what it was worth. And I came and I bid $800 because that's what I had. He picked up the build sheet. I'm going to fix this car and sell it. And what I get from it is going to help pay for my son's surgery. Diana Crane said nothing. Garrett could hear the building's climate system, a low hum that was audible only in silence. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, North Scottsdale lay spread in the afternoon light, tan rooftops and manicured landscaping, and the distant shimmer of heat off the highway. What I want from you, Garrett continued, is to not get in my way. No lawyers, no fabricated permit requirements. No legal interference with a car I own legally and a debt to your company I paid in full. He set the build sheet down. And I want you to call National Heritage Underwriters yourself. Before I do. A long silence. If you call them, Diana said slowly, before I do, it looks like I discovered it and reported it. If you call them, it looks like you discovered a mistake and corrected it. He met her gaze. That's a different conversation for prosecutors to have. She was still for a long time. Why? She asked. Why what? Why give me that option? You don't owe me anything. I mocked you in front of 400 people. Garrett sat with the question for a moment. He thought about Noah at the kitchen table eating spaghetti, asking if it was for the hospital. He thought about, I hope you fix it good, said with the easy certainty of a child who believed his father could do what he said. He thought about what it cost to keep going when things were hard. Not the dramatic cost, the spectacular effort of some single decisive moment, but the daily cost. The alarm at 4:30. The double shift. The fundraiser that raised $4,000 while you needed 100 times that. He thought about Diana Crane building an auction company, presumably, doing the work, acquiring the reputation, and then watching it start to slip, and making a decision in a moment of fear that she couldn't take back. He wasn't her judge. He'd come here to get something specific, and he'd gotten it. Because getting you prosecuted doesn't help my son, he said. But recovering what you stole, even indirectly, might. Diana Crane sat with that. Outside the window, Phoenix spread in all directions, flat and bright in the desert sun. I'll call them today, she said. Good. He gathered the folder and stood. Mr. Voss, he turned. Diana was still sitting, hands flat on the table. I'm sorry. For what it's worth. The joke. The microphone. She looked at him steadily. That was wrong. Garrett held her gaze. It was, he said. He walked out. Diana Crane called National Heritage Underwriters that afternoon. She did not confess cleanly. People rarely did, and Garrett hadn't expected her to. But she disclosed enough, questioned the assessment report, flagged concerns about the mechanical claim, offered to cooperate with a review, that National Heritage opened a fraud investigation the same week. Rosa tracked it through her contacts at the county court. The investigation moved quickly. Because fraud investigations moved quickly when the defrauded party was an insurance company with its own legal department and a financial incentive to recover $1 million. National Heritage dispatched their own investigators, who contacted Harold Park for his assessment and Rosa's documentation. They had what they needed within a week. Within 3 weeks, the findings were documented and submitted to the state attorney general's office. The charges filed against Diana Crane were insurance fraud, fraudulent business representation relating to Pacific Valley Auto Assessment, and breach of fiduciary duty in connection with the charity auction, because the car she donated had already been paid for by an insurance claim, and directing a charity auction toward the sale of an asset with undisclosed encumbrances was its own category of wrong. Her auction license was suspended pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. The Crane Prestige offices went dark in the second week of the following month. Garrett heard about it from Felix, who had a network in the auction world that stretched back decades. The staff saw it coming, Felix told him. The writing had been on the wall for 2 years. They're not all bad people. Some of them are very good. They just worked for someone who made a terrible decision when she was backed into a corner. Garrett thought about that for a while. He didn't take pleasure in the offices going dark. He'd never wanted that, had said as much to Diana Crane across a conference table. What he'd wanted was for Noah to be safe. What had happened to Crane Prestige was the consequence of what Diana had done, not the goal. There was a difference. It mattered to him that there was a difference. The court, in reviewing the circumstances of the auction and the fraudulent representation of Lot 12's condition, ordered that a portion of the recovered insurance funds, $370,000, after legal costs, be directed to the Phoenix Children's Medical Foundation, in recognition that the charity auction had been conducted under false pretenses, and that the foundation was the named beneficiary of the event. The foundation's board, when informed of the full circumstances, a single father's $800 bid, the factory build sheet, 9 years in Italy, and the son waiting for a transplant, made a determination. They set aside the full $370,000 as a restricted fund. For Noah Voss. Garrett learned about it on a Tuesday morning, sitting in the transit yard break room with a coffee that had gone cold. Rosa called him. He made her say it twice. The foundation board made it unanimous, she said. All 370. In Noah's name. Specifically for his care. He sat in the break room for a long time after she hung up. One of his colleagues, a man named Darnell, who'd worked the yard for 22 years and had the philosophical calm of someone who'd seen everything, came in for coffee and looked at Garrett and said, "Good news or bad news?" "Good news," Garrett said. Looked like it might be both. "It might be," Garrett said, "but mostly good." Darnell poured his coffee and sat across from him. He'd heard the story, most of the yard had. Word spread at a transit depot the way it spread anywhere people spent long hours together. "The boy going to be okay?" he asked. "We're getting there," Garrett said. Darnell nodded. "Good." He looked at his coffee. "You know what you did, right?" Walking into that auction house. Bidding that 800. Garrett was quiet. Most people would have seen that listing and thought, too complicated, too risky, not my problem. Darnell looked up. "You saw something no one else saw, and you bet everything you had on it. That's not luck. I knew the engine. You did more than know the engine." Darnell stood, taking his coffee. "You went." He went back to work. The buses needed maintenance whether the rest of Garrett's life was in chaos or not. There was something steadying about that. The work that didn't care about any of it, that just needed to be done correctly, and would always need to be done correctly, and would be there tomorrow regardless of what insurance companies and lawyers and charity foundations decided. He was grateful for that. He'd always been grateful for that. Felix Ortega called on the morning the foundation determination was announced. "You know," Felix said, "when you walked into that auction in that jacket," I almost said something. "About what?" "About the jacket." Felix paused. I thought, whoever this man is, he doesn't belong here. A long pause. "I was wrong about that." "You gave me a letter," Garrett said. "You didn't have to do that. You built that engine," Felix said. "I imported 30 of them. I always wanted to shake the hand of one of the people who made them. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. I just didn't expect to find you in Phoenix, bidding $800 at a charity auction." "Life goes in strange directions," Garrett said. "It does," Felix agreed. "Your son is going to be okay, Garrett. I have a feeling." The Lamborghini, once Garrett had finished his full restoration of the accessible mechanical systems, was assessed by Harold Park and 2 additional independent evaluators at Felix's recommendation. Harold came back for the assessment with the same deliberateness he'd brought to the first visit. He walked around the car. He checked the documentation. He listened to the engine. Then he sat down in a folding chair in Garrett's garage and didn't say anything for a moment. "You know," Harold said finally, "in 40 years of insurance assessment, I've seen maybe 6 engines that were what I'd call truly right, not just functional." "Right." He looked at the V12. "This is the 7th. He wrote his assessment on his letterhead and signed it. The assessed value came back at $1.4 million. Felix brokered the sale to a collector in Santa Fe, a man who'd been looking for a documented LP5000 QV for 11 years and who had followed the auction story after it surfaced in the Phoenix business press. He drove down to see the car himself. When he heard the engine start, he went quiet in the way people went quiet when something was better than they'd expected. He bought it without negotiating. The sale closed at $1.2 million. After taxes, After Rose's legal fees, after the costs of parts and labor and the flatbed and the specialist evaluations, Garrett cleared $840,000. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time after the wire transfer confirmed. He thought about the account he'd been monitoring for 18 months. Noah Hospital. He thought about the number on Dr. Reyes's screen. He thought about the fundraiser that had raised $4,000. He thought about the weekends at the detail lot in Tempe, back aching, hands cracked from the cleaning chemicals. He thought about $800 and a folded piece of paper and an auction room that had laughed. Then he called Dr. Reyes. "We can move forward," he said. There was a pause on the line, the pause of someone who understood what those words had cost. "I'll contact the transplant coordinator today," Dr. Reyes said. "We'll get Noah on the active list." "Whatever it takes," Garrett said. "Whatever it takes, Doctor." Reyes agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "Then, Mr. Voss, I've had a lot of families come through my office over the years. I've seen a lot of people fight very hard for their kids." His voice was careful. "I want you to know that it matters. What you've done. It matters." Garrett thanked him and hung up. He sat for a while longer. Outside, Phoenix was going about its afternoon. Traffic noise. A dog barking somewhere on the street. The particular dry warmth of a desert city in late season. He went to Noah's room. Noah was at his desk, working on a drawing. He liked to draw. Had inherited that from Maya, who had painted small watercolors that still hung on the kitchen wall. He looked up when Garrett came in. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, Bud." Garrett sat on the edge of the bed. "We got good news today." Noah set down his pencil. His dark eyes were steady and careful, the way they always were when something important was being said. "About the hospital?" "About the hospital." A pause. "Did the car help?" "The car helped a lot." Noah nodded slowly. He looked at his drawing. Then, back at Garrett. "Are the doctors going to fix me?" "They're going to try really hard," Garrett said, "and we can give them everything they need now." Noah was quiet. Then he said, "Dad, yeah, can we draw the car? The one you fixed?" Garrett looked at his son. The dark eyes, the careful stillness, the easy way he held hard things, like his mother. "Yeah," he said, "we can draw the car." The surgery came 8 weeks later. It was a Tuesday in November. The desert had gone quiet and cool, and the sky was the particular shade of blue it got when the heat finally broke for the season. Garrett drove Noah to Phoenix Children's Medical at 5 in the morning. Noah was still half asleep, resting his head against the window, watching the dark streets pass. "Dad," he said as they pulled into the hospital parking structure. "Yeah, are you scared?" Garrett parked the car. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the quiet. The parking structure was deserted at this hour. Somewhere below them, the hospital was already moving. Nurses and technicians and doctors who started their days before the city woke up. "Yeah," Garrett said. "I'm scared." Noah considered this. "Me too." "That's okay. You said that before." Noah looked at him. "When I asked about the auction." "You said it was okay to be scared. It is. Because you try anyway." Garrett looked at his son. "Yeah," he said. "Because you try anyway." Rosa met them at the surgical check-in. She had coffee for Garrett and a small stuffed bear for Noah, a thing she'd apparently carried in her bag for weeks, waiting for this moment. Noah accepted the bear with the dignity of a child who was past the age for stuffed animals, but understood why it had been given. He named it immediately. "His name is 41, Noah said. Rosa looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at the bear. After the engine, Noah explained, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious. "The one you fixed. Doctor, Reyes came through the doors at 6:45. Scrubs, coffee, reading glasses on top of his head. He crouched down to Noah's level and talked to him for a few minutes about what was going to happen, using words that were honest without being frightening. Noah listened carefully. At 7, the surgical team came to take him. Noah handed 41 to Garrett. "Hold him," he said. "I will." Noah looked at him. The look was very young and very old at the same time. The look of a child who had learned more than children should have to learn, and carried it without complaint. "I'll see you when I wake up," Noah said. "I'll be right here," Garrett said. He watched his son walk through the doors until they closed. He sat in the family waiting room with Rosa and the stuffed bear and a cup of coffee that went cold. Rosa worked quietly on her laptop. Garrett watched the wall clock and tried not to watch it. At 11:15, Doc Reyes came back. He was smiling. The surgery had gone well. Better than expected. The new heart was a strong one. Noah was stable. He was in recovery and would be for several hours, but he was doing well. Garrett sat in the family waiting room and pressed the palms of his hands against his eyes for a moment. "Thank you," Rosa said to Garrett, not to the doctor. Garrett shook his head. "The car," he said. "You fixed the car. The car fixed itself." He thought about the V12 catching on the third attempt. Rough, and then smooth, and then unmistakable. He thought about a factory in Italy, 30 years ago, and a young man from Arizona who'd spent 9 years learning what precision meant. He thought about a build sheet folded in a jacket pocket, waiting for the moment it was needed. "I just knew what it was," he said. They let him in to see Noah at 3 in the afternoon. His son was asleep, the way children slept after long, hard things, completely, with their whole bodies, the way they'd slept when they were small. The monitors around the bed were steady. The light in the room was the particular warm dimness of hospital afternoons. Garrett pulled the chair close. He set 41 on the windowsill, next to the small model Lamborghini he'd bought from a hobby shop the week before, a gold one. Not quite the right year, but close enough. He took Noah's hand. It was small, still. 7 years old, still small. He thought about Maya, about the hospital room she'd been in at the end, the same quality of dimness, the same monitors, about what she'd said to him on the last day, when she'd held Noah with the particular strength of someone who knew they were running out of time to hold anything. "You take care of him." He had. He was. He thought about an auction house in Phoenix and a room full of people who'd laughed. He thought about a woman at a microphone making a joke at his expense and a room full of strangers who'd found it funny, and a yellow sticker on a steering wheel that said non-operational in capital letters and meant nothing, nothing at all, to anyone who actually knew. He thought about 9 years in Italy, about Carmine and the testing stand and the idea that precision was a form of respect, for the car, for the person who would drive it, for the work. He thought about $800 and a folded piece of paper. He thought about Noah at the kitchen table, eating spaghetti, asking if it was for the hospital, saying, "I hope you fix it good," with the easy certainty of a child who trusted his father completely. He thought about deserving that trust. He sat in the chair next to his son's hospital bed and held his hand. Outside the window, the Phoenix afternoon was going gold and long-shadowed. The light doing what desert light did at the end of a long day, going rich and warm and generous with the things it touched. Garrett Voss sat there, a mechanic from Arizona with grease he'd never quite gotten out from under his nails, and felt the small warm weight of his son's hand in his. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Noah breathed. The Lamborghini model caught the last of the afternoon light on the windowsill and held it. The light held there a moment longer. Then the sun moved, and it was gone. On the 4th floor of a Phoenix hospital, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and new paint and the particular quiet of a place where people came back from hard things, a father sat with his son. Outside, the city went about its evening. The transit yard would be filling with the night shift. The auction house was dark. The justice of it all, the fraud charges, the suspended license, the $370,000 directed to a boy who needed it, had all happened by document and by law, the way justice happened when it happened right. No confrontation, no cruelty, just paper and truth and the slow machinery of consequence catching up. Garrett didn't think about any of that right now. He thought about Noah's hand, the weight of it, real and warm and there, his son's hand. The only weight that had ever mattered,